Will you pray with me? God, may these words move us toward resting in you, our rock, our refuge, our silence. Amen. My salvation, my rock, my stronghold, my hope, my deliverance, my honor, my refuge. These are the names expressed by the psalmist about the holy that we just heard. The words in this psalm are just beautiful and can be so comforting to read. But most days, to be honest, I approach this sort of adulation over God with a good-sized dollop of resistance. I wonder if maybe the distance between the psalmist and their understanding of who God is and how the world works and my understanding of who God is and how the world works might just be too far a chasm to cross. Those writing the Psalms lived in a local world, a world that they could reach only by the distance of foot or wheels or hoof. They lived in a world that did, yes, have ethnic and religious diversity, but not to the degree that their entire worldview was challenged. Sometimes in the recent past, they understood their God as a force that literally fought other gods overhead while the humans waged war down below. How, sometimes I find myself wondering, how can poetry written with this theology, this frame understanding of the universe, really speak to me, to us? We who live in a global world, who wake up every day to reports of conflict and strife in every corner of the earth. We who live in such diversity that our understanding of God has been shaped and enriched through the effort of making room for the dignity and beliefs of others. We who have witnessed great terrors inflicted on human beings and have had to wrestle with God's presence or seeming absence in shaping these world events. Is it possible for us to hold the immense sorrow of the world and yet still sing to God, my rock, my refuge, my stronghold? This is a question for each of us to wrestle with. Its theological name is theodicy. And I know that many of us do wrestle with this question, and often. Today, I will share a story that is not an answer, and yet if I allow it to, it sits there plainly, quietly, waiting for me to take notice that it might be the only answer. I love to hike alone. It is truly one of my favorite things. And yet somehow, it is a thing that I rarely seem to be able to do. Friday should be an ideal day for me to head out with my kids in school and with me the day off, but there is always something that keeps me from it. Kids' doctor or therapy or dentist appointment in the middle of the day, or a meeting with their school, an urgent errand or email or bill that has been pushed forward one too many days and must be handled. A chance to see my husband after several days of consecutive nursing shifts. Leftover work that didn't quite fit into the work week. The state of the house after a long, hard week, or the urgent need to restock the fridge for the always hungry, never satisfied teenage eaters in my household. And Sometimes there is a rare free day, and then there are still endless reasons not to go. It's been so long that my gear is scattered and I can't find certain essentials. The weather is iffy. The pass is impassable. I can't figure out where to go. If I stay up too late and I can't find the chains and I'm worried the hike I choose will be too isolated, not safe, or not isolated enough, not fun, inertia and overwhelm set in, and it feels like it just might be easier to stay home and walk the dogs around the neighborhood and call it good. Sometimes I get tired of all this mind chatter and I just go anyways. On one such day, I did have an appointment in the morning, so I planned to pack the night before. Only I got in so late from work the night before, trying to wrap things up, that I pushed packing until after the appointment. But by the time the appointment was over the next day, at 10 a.m., I still had to gather my gear and my courage and make the 2-hour drive. This was a winter hike, which meant my late arrival would give me scant time to get up the mountain and back down before getting dark. I hemmed and hawed, as I often do, and I finally got fed up and started throwing stuff in my pack. I was going. By the time I arrived, it was past noon. I am not a fast hiker, and I calculated my speed going up and coming down with the complication of snowshoes. It was going to be cutting it close. And so for safety, I decided on a turnaround time, that if I hadn't reached the top by this time, I absolutely, positively, no matter what, would turn around at this time. So feeling good about that plan, I set off. As I slowly made my way up the hill, my brain, as it often is, was buzzing. Maybe some of you have buzzing brains. Maybe you have calm brains. I thought about my new church call and how it was going, how I was doing as a new minister. I celebrated achievements. I did a good amount of self-critique. And I held with each of the people I was especially praying for in my mind. I rolled each of my kids over in my consciousness, fretting and worrying about each one in turn, anxious for their future, spinning a bit over how to support them. I worried incessantly about the hike, calculating and recalculating the speed I was going and the amount of daylight left, which of course led me to fretting about my state of fitness and my need for better self-care. I thought of the current world's woes, the anger and the retribution that just kept sparking and the grief that kept pouring out. You get the idea, okay? My brain was flitting and firing as my quads lifted my legs over and over again. I was in the woods. I was doing the hike. Yet my thoughts and world I was constructing was wholly consumed by my worry. As I trudged up, the energy from exerting my space and the space to mull everything over finally began to settle my mind. I noticed the trees, coated with snow and glowing in that special overcast way of the Pacific Northwest. I noticed how the forest fauna was gradually changing as I gained elevation. I noticed the ways my lungs expanded to take in air and exhaled to breathe it out. At my absolute turnaround time, no matter what, I judged myself to be about 15 minutes from the top. Of course, I kept going, telling myself an extra 20 minutes would be fine. But then I got to the top, and I had to take photos and take in the view, and I had to eat my cold PB&J, and so 45 minutes later, I started heading back down. I did not make it before dark. Dusk set in about midway down, and I got to watch as the sky first leached its colors, and then the light got soft and diffuse. I got to see how the changing light reflected off the snow. Gradually, it got darker, until I was walking down the hill in the quiet night. For those of you who are worried about my safety, I was walking down an easy grade of a former logging road. But the trees were framing both sides of this gradual descent, and I waited to turn on my headlamp until I really, really needed it, and I discovered that with a combination of snow and light glow, I could see just fine. Unlike the hike up that was full of chatter and brain noise and worry, the walk down was so quiet. I could hear my steps. I could hear my breath. I felt like I could hear the stars, the ones that were peeking through the clouds. There was a restfulness in the silence, and I felt myself being held in that silence. As I walked down the hill in total silence, in holy darkness, I experienced such a sense of spaciousness and peace. I felt myself rest in God. Nothing had changed in my life or the world since the beginning of that hike. There was still just as much scary, sad stuff happening. All the things I fretted and worried over were still very much present. I had solved nothing with my mind churn. God had not swept in and altered the course of my life, had not made my children's lives easier, had not paved the way for peace. And yet in that moment, I rested in God. I knew all was well. My salvation, my rock, my stronghold, my hope, my deliverance, my honor, my refuge. You might not be a hiker. Turns out I'm not as much of a hiker as I'd like to be myself. But you too probably have a place where you can go, an activity that you do that allows your worrying, churning brain to rest, to remember that all of your anxiety about the world, all of your worry about growing conflicts will not by themselves change the course of the world. To remember that you deserve stillness, that peace belongs to you. To remember that God is holding your life. Just like I experienced getting to the hike and on the hike, the world and worry will always be there. The expansive information age will always feed us news that makes us fret. And as Jesus told us, the poor will always be with us. But so will God, patiently waiting for us to arrive to her, to rest in her, to dwell within her silence. For God alone is my soul silent. From her is my hope. Only she is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I shall never be shaken. Amen.